Hello everyone. Welcome to the Using SOQL Queries webinar. SOQL provides a powerful way to select data for your Conga solutions. In this webinar, we'll show you some useful techniques for working with SOQL. I'm Ashley Green, and I'm the Director of Education and Communities here at Conga. I'll be your moderator for this session. Before we get started, let's do a little housekeeping. The entire webinar is slated to last about 60 minutes and will include breaks for questions. We have a lot of registrants, so everyone's phones will be on mute. If you do have questions, please submit them online. Obviously, we may not get to all of your questions, but we'll answer as many as we can during the session, and any that we don't get to will be answered in an FAQ that we'll post to our knowledge base. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll also make that recording available within a few days on our YouTube channel and in our knowledge base. So let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce Shelley Houlihan, who will be taking you through this session. Shelley is one of our business analysts, and she's looking forward to introducing you to SOQL queries. Shelley, it's all yours.
Hi everyone, thanks for attending the webinar, and really excited, as Ashley said, to show you a bit about SOQL queries. So just to start off, I just want to let you all know that this is intended to be an introductory sort of webinar. So by all means, this is not going to be the end-all be-all class for your SOQL knowledge, but it's just meant to be an introduction and show you how queries work and how to use them with Conga Composer and sort of get your feet wet. So the assumption is that you've never seen SOQL before, and we're going to take you through it from the beginning. So if you have done a bit with SOQL, then you're going to see some information you probably already know, but I think that's the best place to start, is at the beginning, as they say. So our first slide here, first of all, what is SOQL? It stands for Salesforce Object Query Language. So similar to SQL, if you are a SQL person, I am not. So from what I understand, it's sort of a watered down version. Maybe not as powerful as SQL, but it's Salesforce's little version of being able to run queries. So the next probably logical question is, why would you use SOQL? What is it, and why would you use it? Not only what does it stand for, but what it does. It's an alternative to running a Salesforce report. So it's a way to retrieve data out of Salesforce according to some set of criteria. Just like a report, that can be very, very basic or very complex, and we'll get into some of those examples later. When you should use SOQL or why, my general rule for Conga Composer in relation to SOQL queries is that I do not use a query unless I have to. And what I mean by that is, if you cannot get your data that you need with a Salesforce report, then that's when I go to a SOQL query. But otherwise, I think reports are easy to use. We all know how to use them and build them. They're easy to make changes to, and so forth. So if you can get to what you need with a report, by all means, go for that low-hanging fruit and just go that route. But if you are doing something a little bit more off the beaten path, that's where a query comes in. So let's go into a browser and I will show you what I mean by a little bit more of off the beaten path. I'm going to open up an account here. I'm just in my development environment with some sample data, and down here under Notes and Attachments, the related list, we have both notes and attachments. And this is a particular object that Salesforce does not allow you to report on. So this would be a good example of when you should go to a query. You can't get to this data. Maybe you need the file name or the ID of the attachment or something like that. The contents of the note, if you're someone who uses those text notes, you can't get to that with a report. So that would be a good solution to go to a query, because with a SOQL query you can get to that data. Another example would be, and we will get into this a bit more extensively later, but if I scroll up here to the opportunities related list on this particular account, you see that we have two opportunities. If we wanted to do some sort of calculation, like let's say that we wanted to get the total amount for both of these opportunities without having to show the math. And what I mean by that is, to output both results maybe in our Word template and then run a calculation in Word or Excel or whatever we're doing and show the math and get that grand total. I just want the total. So a query is really good at doing that. It's called an aggregate query, and again, I'm going to get into that a bit more extensively later. But if you're doing math, calculations like counting, sums, averages, queries can do that in spades. So that's a really good reason to go to a query. You might be thinking, well, a Salesforce report can also do calculations, Shelley. You're off your rocker, you forgot that. You're right, Salesforce reports can do calculations. The problem is that when Salesforce gives us the data from a report, and us, I mean Conga, we basically just get raw data. So we're not getting those on-the-fly sort of calculations and formulas that you can do in a report. So that's where the power of the query comes in, to be able to do those calculations. One last example of a good time to use a SOQL query would be if you are an organization that has locked down your users so that you do not let them export report data. Some organizations do that from a security standpoint. They're leery of having users be able to run a report and then export maybe their entire contact list or something like that. A query is a good workaround there because it doesn't require that permission of export reports. You can get around that. So another good reason to use a query if you're one of those organizations that has that limitation. Okay, so that covers the what it is and the why you would use it, or gives you a bit of a taste of that. Let's get into how you're actually going to build the queries and use them within Conga Composer. I'm going to close this account here and jump over to a tab where I have our website, congamerge.com, pulled up here. This is the first step in your query process. You just want to go to our support page and then down to this installations tab. Scroll down and you will see Conga Query Manager and this Get It Now hyperlink. This is where you're going to install the Conga Query Manager object. It is a free custom object that's going to get installed into your Salesforce environment. Sometimes we call it just Conga Queries. So Conga Query Manager, Conga Queries, that's interchangeable. It's the same thing. If you click Get It Now, it's going to have you log into Salesforce and then take you through the standard AppExchange installation process. So remember that link is set up for that Get It Now link here is set up with the assumption you're installing in a production environment, so it's giving you that login link. If you're someone who's going to be putting it into a sandbox, just remember to delete login and change that to test, and be sure you click go or enter so that it updates that, and then you'll be able to log in with your sandbox credentials. One other important note, if you go to the Salesforce AppExchange and search for Conga Query Manager, you will not find it. And that's not just a cruel trick that we're playing on you. It's by design. You need Conga Composer in order for Conga Query Manager to work. So we didn't want people just going out and installing it willy-nilly. Hey, what's this new app they have? So it's a private listing. It's still on the AppExchange. It's certified from a security standpoint and all of that. It's just that you're not going to be able to search for it. So it is important that you come to the website and get it here. I've already done that particular step and installed it into my development environment. So I'm going to jump over and show you guys what it looks like after you install. It's going to create a new custom tab on your All Tabs view. So it's just going to be called Conga Queries. And you'll see that I have quite a few in here. This is a test environment again that I have. So I have a lot in here, but we're going to start fresh to start with, just to show you all how we set one of these up. So first things first, just click the New button. And what I like to do is give my query a name and optionally a description. And then this might sound funny, but for right now we're just going to ignore this last field called SOQL select statement at the bottom and just click Save. So we'll just call this I mean, you really can call this whatever you want, strawberry ice cream or something like that. But it's probably helpful if you have something like, you know, opportunity products or something sort of descriptive so you know what it's going to do. And then just click Save. The reason we do that is because after you save it, you'll get this button for Conga Query Builder. This is a sort of wizard that's going to take you through a few steps to build each portion of your query. So really quick, let's jump back to that All Tabs view, and we'll go back down to Conga Queries. I just want to show you a sample query that I have. Let's see. Here's one I have called Some Fields from an Opportunity. But basically what I want you all to see is this SOQL select statement, that what it looks like as the end product, and then we'll sort of work backwards. But you can see this is basically just a string of text, but it corresponds to what you're going to query on, which object you can see here from opportunity, and which fields you're going to select, and then if you have any filter criteria. So eventually, after we go through Conga Query Builder, this field will automatically get populated. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind, and then we're going to go back to our other query, and I'll show you all what this is going to look like. One thing I like to point out to people who are new, because I found this really helpful when I was getting started with queries a couple of years ago, is that Salesforce reports actually run the SOQL language in the background. It's just that Salesforce did that nice user interface as an overlay to make it easier for people like me who are not developers to build a report. So you will notice as we go through this query building process that each sort of step or clause of that SOQL select statement that will be our eventual query corresponds to something in a report that you're used to. So what I have now is this Conga Query Builder Step 1 pulled up in this tab, and a select report type over here. So I just kind of wanted to compare the two so that you guys can kind of get a feeling for how they're related. First step when you're building a report is to select your report type, right? So let's say that I want opportunities with products. We're going to do the same thing on the query, except that instead of starting with your higher level object like opportunity and then also selecting your lower level or detail object of products, with queries you're going to do the reverse. So you start with what we call the base object, and you can see here there's a little reminder, that's your lowest level object. So instead of going to opportunity, I'm going to go to opportunity product, and then we will work our way up from there. So it's a little bit flip-flopped from a report in that way, but you'll still be able to get all of the same data. So you simply select the object that you want and click Next. And this next step is where you would select your fields. So on the report, you know, we click the Create button, and then we start adding fields to the report, right? Or the opportunity with products one comes with a bunch loaded in as a standard sort of set. So all of these fields that I have show up as columns on my report. What we're going to do on the query is go through these sort of menus and select whatever we want. So we start with the base is our opportunity product. Let's say that we need a price field. I think it's called, we'll do list price. So you can either double click or use these buttons. If you use the very top or the very bottom, that selects or deselects all of the fields. I would not recommend doing that. You probably just need a couple at a time. What you'll notice next is we have these lookup menus. So this is what I mean by starting at the bottom and working your way up. Every lookup field that you have on the base object that you selected, so in our case opportunity product, the query will then make all of the data from that lookup relationship available to use in your query. So we've got created by and last modified by as those two standard user lookup fields you always see on a Salesforce record. And then we also, of course, have a lookup back to the opportunity. So maybe here I want, I don't know, call out a field. Maybe we want stage from the opportunity. And then finally, there's also a lookup to price book entry. So that's, back to your sort of product price book. So maybe we get like product name from here. So that's what I mean by you can leverage those lookup relationships and still get the same level of data that you would on your report. So once you have the field selected, same as selecting your columns on your report, then it's time to add your filter criteria. So just like you would add a field filter on your report, same idea on a query. It's going to correspond to the portion of the SOCL select statement that we call the where clause. So oftentimes with Conga Composer solutions, as you all probably know, we filter by what we call the master object ID. So let's say that this particular query I'm going to use in our opportunity invoice solution, and that's a Conga Composer button that I've built on the opportunity record. So the first thing I want to do is filter by opportunity ID, and the operator will be equals, the value will be blank, and then I can certainly add in additional criteria if I wanted. Maybe we do product family equals services, and I can just type that in. Let me scooch this out a little bit. There we go. So you can see that the default behavior here for the sort of Boolean is just and on everything in the Conga Query Builder. We can always change that later, so don't pay too much mind to that right now. So then you're going to, once you have all your filters loaded up, you can choose a sort order. If we wanted to sort by, ascending quantity, we could do that. If we wanted to do a row limit, we can do that here. If you only wanted to show maybe the top 2 rows according to that sort order, you can do that. For right now, I'm just going to leave those blank so we keep this sort of simple and straightforward, and then just click next. So the last step here is just an opportunity for you to test your query and make sure that it's returning the data that you expect. So you can see here the SOCL select statement has been built. The Query Builder did that for us. So let's just go through again, as a reminder, the select portion is going to be all of the fields that you chose, same as the columns that you add to your report. So there are all of our fields. The from is which object we're querying on. That was our opportunity product. It says opportunity line item because this is all based on API names. So if you see something that's a little bit different than what you're used to, that's probably why. And then the where clause is, again, our filter criteria. So opportunity ID equals blank. Conga Query Builder puts in this PV0 as the placeholder. That's parameter value 0, and it just corresponds to the first, same thing as the first filter on a report. It's the first sort of criterion on the query. So that's the part that Conga Composer, when it runs this query, will plug in that master object ID in that little placeholder spot. So it's that way to make the query or the report dynamic regardless of which record we're launching off of. So if you guys are confused at all by that, then you might be new to pulling detail data to Conga Composer. That's probably a good time to submit a case or contact our support team and we can help you out with that. So to test this, all we have to do is go get a value to punch in for PV0. So what I'm going to do is open up the, well, I had one going. Let's open up this Reardon Steel account. Remember, I need an opportunity ID, so I'm just going to go down to this Philadelphia Mill opportunity and grab the ID and just copy paste that into that PV0 spot and then click preview. My pop-up window opened on another monitor, so let me drop that over. And you can see there I'm getting 2 results for all of the various fields that we had selected. So we know that it's working, and that's great. You do not have to delete this out of here if you don't want to before you click save, but you can if you like. It doesn't really matter. And then just click save, and it will automatically put that SOCL select statement into that field on your query record. So that is how you build the query. The other important part of this is that the Conga query object also acts as a place to store the queries. And what I mean by that is we keep them here, kind of like a little filing cabinet. Each query has its own record, and then we can refer to the record ID or the query ID in our Conga solution. So again, I'm just going to highlight and copy that. And then I have in this FAR tab, browser tab, my opportunity invoice button built out already. And all I'm going to do is edit here and add that query to my Conga Composer button so that Conga knows to run that query and retrieve that additional data that we wanted. So the parameter you're going to use is ampersand query ID equals. Those aren't case sensitive, so don't worry about that, but spelling is important, so be sure you spell it correctly. Paste in your ID, and then you can use an alias. Just like I have services as the alias for this particular report ID, you can do the same thing for a query, and I recommend it. It helps keep you on the straight and narrow, keep things organized. I'm just going to call this prod family services because I cannot repeat aliases within the same button URL. So make sure these are unique from one another. And then if we do a save and go back out to an opportunity, we made a change to that button. So if I just refresh the record and click that invoice button, let me just drag this over. When we get the data set, I'll just grab Template Builder. You guys will now see that particular query data showing up as available to us to then use on the template. So that's kind of start to finish how you're going to build the query and reference it in your Composer solution. So here's my template builder. If I change data set from master to that prod fam services, that alias that I used for the query, you can see all of the field names are showing up here and then our sample data. So remember, Template Builder is only going to show one column of data. Remember, we did have 2 results on that particular record, but we just give you a sample. We don't show every single result. If you do want to see all of the results, that's where you go to the View Data Excel workbook, and it'll show you everything. So that is the end of the webinar. Just kidding. We're not done yet, everyone. But it might be a good time to take a little break, do you think, Ashley, and ask questions?
Sure. Yeah, we do have a few questions.
Okay.
Excuse me. One question just had to do with usage of API. And if I'm using SOCL queries, is that consuming a lot of my API calls?
It does. The queries do run on the API within your Salesforce environment. So yes, they are consuming API requests, but to my knowledge, it's not anything significant. But that is something that probably is best to check with Salesforce support, or if we can find that data before we send out the resources to you all, we'll definitely let you know. It's a tricky thing to estimate how many would be used because everyone's environment is so different. How many fields you're pulling, how many objects, how many lookup objects, all of that stuff can be contributing factors to how many API calls are used. So yes, it will use them, but as far as an estimate of how many per query, it's really impossible to say.
Okay. Another question is there a limit to the number of records that I can pull using SOCL queries?
There is a limit. Great question. Conga Composer has a limitation of 1,500, so 1,500 results per query. And that's the same as reports. So that's just a limitation that we have to make sure that everything runs smoothly and as quickly as possible for all of our customers. There is a way that you can sort of have a query run the first 1,500 rows and then pick up at record number 1501 and run the next 1,500 rows. It's called offset. So if someone is interested in that, that's again a good one to take to our support team. We can walk you through that. But yes, there is a 1,500 row limit for a regular query. Later, when we get into the aggregated query examples, the row limit there, result limit, is 200.
Okay. Another question is if I'm building solutions using SOQL queries, do my users need special permissions to be able to run them?
Yes, they do. Not really special permissions, but the same as any other Salesforce process that you're doing. If the user does not have access to the object, they're not going to be able to use that object or pull data from it. So the permissions that they would need are read access to the Conga query custom object, and then they need visible access to the name field and the SOQL select statement field.
Okay. And another question is, I'm using the Salesforce Professional version. Will the Conga queries work with Salesforce Professional?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. And I think that's all the questions that we have for now.
Okay, good little break, and let's get right back to it, team. So now that we've done a sample query and referenced that in Conga Composer, what I wanted to show you all is getting a little bit more into just SOQL itself and sort of what you can do and the syntax and those sorts of things. So this portion isn't going to be as Conga specific, but I think it will help you all wrap your minds around how to write queries and the different things you can do. So I'm just going to go back to my Conga queries sort of home view, and then I've got all these sample queries. You can see SOQL Webinar 6, 5, 4, and so forth. So I'm going to be showing you all a bunch of examples from here, but one tool that I really like to use, there are a bunch of different ones out there to run and build and test queries. The Conga Query Builder is a great one if you're doing basic stuff, but as soon as you start to get more advanced, or there's just some nice features that this Force.com Explorer has. So this is a tool that's free to download from the Salesforce Developer Force website. This is one of those resources that we will be sure to send the information to you all in the follow-up email for the webinar. But it's just a really easy tool to use to build and test queries. What I like about it is if you start to do something wrong, it sort of gives you a hint. Like if you'd added select, for example, instead of select at the beginning of your select statement, you see how it turns blue? It's sort of an immediate hint to you that you've done something wrong. And then as soon as I get that back to regular select, it turns red, and that's the signal to you that it's correct. So you'll see later when we run some of these that it'll return errors. It'll kind of show you what you're doing wrong. But this is a tool that I use pretty often. So you guys will see me sort of toggling back and forth between this and then the Conga query records in Salesforce. The reason I'm using it today is just because I wanted to show you guys this for your own edification, but also it's much easier to run and test the queries in here. This thing is actually logged into my test or development environment, so it's going to pull the same data right out of my Salesforce instance, but rather than having to go add the query ID each time to Conga Composer and have Conga run it, it'll just be faster to run these tests in the Force.com Explorer. So let's start out. Again, this is just a quick review, but your basic syntax is just that you have the select with the fields and then from with the object name. And those are the two things, sort of the two pieces of the query that are absolutely required in order for it to run. In that other one we had a where clause, so that's where you start to get, a little bit more advanced, but just from a very basic standpoint, this is all you need for this to run. And all I'm doing when I'm running these is highlighting this and copying it to my computer's clipboard and then just pasting it here and clicking query. And then you can see it's returning all 34 of my contact records from my development instance there. So this is a little bit different in that because we have no where criteria, it's just pulling back every single contact from my instance and those three fields, ID, first name, last name, from those contacts. I only have 34 because it's a test environment. I don't have a lot of data in it. But if you were to do that, there might be hundreds or thousands of records. So usually you do want where criteria, but same thing as a report. You can have those filters optionally or not. Let's go back. I should probably keep that tab open, make this a little bit easier for myself. Okay, so let's open up number 2, and that just gets into the where criteria. So this is, meant to just hammer in this syntax into your brain so you remember this for all time. There will be a test later, so keep sharp. Okay, so your where criteria, again, are your filters. So this one, we're doing the same exact query we had before, those 3 fields from the contact, but we've added in a filter of mailing state equals Colorado. Now I'm using the 2-letter state abbreviation that we use here in the US, and that's because that's how the data is entered into my Salesforce instance. If you guys, for whatever reason, were using a state or province where you have it all spelled out, then by all means you would want to write it out as the spelled out version. You'll also notice that I have these tick marks or apostrophes or single quotes, whatever you want to call them. I have those surrounding that Colorado abbreviation. The reason being that's a text string, so that's the syntax in a query. You want to surround your static text values with those single quotes. And then the last thing that we've gotten a little bit more advanced here is we're doing that order by. So you might remember when I was going through the Conga Query Builder, on that second to last step it says, do you want to order this by some field, and do you want it to be ascending or descending? So we did this one ordered by last name from the contact, ascending. So it's basically alphabetical order. Let's go punch that into the Explorer, and we'll see. Oops, I keep hitting enter. I forget that I have to click the query button. So there are 4 contact records that have a mailing state of Colorado. It would probably be helpful if I had the mailing state as one of the fields. So another thing, you can just copy paste, since we already are using mailing state in the filter, easy enough to just throw a comma after after last name, paste that in, and we'll just run the query again, and now we have that column as well. So you guys can see those are all Colorado, and then they are being sorted by alphabetical order, Galt all the way down to Wyatt. Okay. So let's go on to the 3rd example we have. Sorry, that's what we just did, order by. This is a good one. We start to get into wildcards. So you can use this % symbol as a wildcard. So kind of like you use an asterisk in search engines and stuff like that, or Salesforce search has that. You can use % symbol as a wildcard to find things that contain certain string of characters or don't contain characters. So when you're using this, usually it goes hand in hand with this like operator. So let's just walk through this particular SOQL select statement. What we're doing is selecting the email, first name and last name fields, again from the contact. And then we have this where not email like, and then single quote, % symbol, gmail.com, single quote. So what it's saying is, show me the email, first name and last name from any contact where the email does not contain gmail.com. So notice that it's set up as where not, and then the field like with the wildcard, rather than being, I always mix this one up. I always have to go look it up because I always want to say where email not like, and it's where not email like. So don't feel like you have to remember this. Again, you just heard me say that I look it up every time. There's a great SOQL documentation that Salesforce put out that has a list of all this syntax and the different things that you can do, the different queries that you can run. Now, not all of that will work when you're running Conga queries. There's things like nested upon nested queries that do not currently work with Conga Composer, but it's a great resource for stuff like this. I can't remember if it's where not or where like not or whatever. You can go there and look that up, and that's another one of those resources we'll be sure to send you all. So I'm just going to throw this into the Force.com Explorer, and you all can see what it's doing here. So if we go down the email addresses, again, we're trying to filter out anyone who's a Gmail. Those people are questionable. Just kidding. We're just trying to find maybe people who have a company email address rather than a personal one. So you can see it's just filtering out anyone who does not have Gmail. Or excuse me, anyone who has Gmail. And then you can see it is including some folks who do not have an email address at all. So that's not Gmail, so it is including it in our query. We can do the reverse. Let's say instead of filtering something out, we want to include something that contains a certain character. So this one is same fields and again from the contact, but what we're doing is looking for any first names that contain the letter H. So what I've done here is put the % symbol on either side. Again, that wild card, and then the whole thing, again, remember to include your single quotes on either side of that. And it's now going to search for anyone whose first name contains the letter H. So let's go test this one. And you can see on first name, Chris does not start with the letter H, neither does John, neither does Shelley, but each of those contain a letter H somewhere in the name. So that's what that % and then your character and then your % character again. It's like a contains. So there are some other wildcards that you can use. Underscore is the other one that I know of. We're just touching, again, this is meant to be an introduction. So I just wanted to get you guys started on some of the other things that you can do. But hopefully this is sort of piquing your interest and we can get into maybe a higher level SOCL webinar at a later date and show you guys some of the advanced solutions. So I'm going to pass it back to Ashley for a moment and see if we have any questions going on. I think we're at a good stopping point.
We sure do, Shelley.
Or not stop, but break.
Break.
Guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
We will take a break. One of the questions was going back to the 1,500 result limit.
Oh, okay.
So if you did have a data set that was larger than that, you'd mentioned using the offset statement
Oh,
to
yeah.
allow you to pull data. Could you show how that works?
Yeah, let's go back to, I can show you all exactly how that works. So let's go back to this second query that we had pulled up. So remember how we were doing order by? I'm just going to use this as sort of a basis. And what we could do, I'm going to take out, since I have so few contact records, you all, this is not going to be the most interesting of tests because I don't have anywhere close to 1,500 contacts or 1,500 anything in this test environment. But what this would look like, so we talked about how Conga Composer limits you to 1,500 results or rows, however you want to think of it, per query that you're running. Now, you can run many, many queries in one Conga Composer solution. So a good workaround to having more than 1,500 rows in your data set is using a tool called Offset. So what this would look like is, imagine that we have more than 1,500 contacts and we've set up, okay, we need these 3 fields from the contact. You want to do an order by, so again, we'll keep our last name ascending to do that sort of alphabetical order, and then you're going to use what's called limit. So this is just like doing a row limit in a Salesforce report, if you've ever done that before. And then you're just going to specify the number of records that you want it to be limited to, or the number of records that you want displayed in this query. So this is another thing that queries are really good at. Salesforce cuts you off at a row limit of 99. The queries let you do, Brad, is there a limit to the row limit? Do you know?
What was the 99?
So Salesforce, you guys, I'm speaking to Brad, who's our resident SQL sort of SOCL expert. But Salesforce, if you do that limit in a report, it cuts you, the highest number you can do is 99. And I didn't know if there was a limit on the query, if it tops out at, 10,000 or something.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure
Okay.
it's documented in Salesforce.
Yeah, I'm sure Salesforce has some sort of limitation to that. So that's another one we'll investigate and try to get that answer for you guys in the follow-up. But basically, because Conga Composer's limit is 1,500 per query, that's why I'm doing limit 1,500. So your first query would look like this. You know, mine's only going to bring back my 34 records. As an example, let's say I cut this off at 15, just so you guys can see what this would look like the next time. So we're going to get all the way through Rose Gonzalez. On my next query, and again, imagine that this is 1,500, you would use a tool called Offset. Oh, maybe Force.com Explorer doesn't let you do this. But, so there are pros and cons. This brings up sort of a side conversation, but a good point. There are, like I said, multiple tools that you can use to build and test queries. Force.com Explorer has pros and cons. The developer workbench has pros and cons. Apparently, Force.com Explorer isn't going to let me run this offset because it's not highlighting this in red, which makes me think it's not really recognizing it. But basically what it would do is offset 16. So my first query was just this. Then I would have a second query that's the same exact thing but offset 16. So it would pick up right after Rose. Let's just try this. Yeah, so it's just this Force.com Explorer is running an older version of the API that doesn't know about this offset. But if you ran this in Conga Composer in your Conga query, this will work just fine. So that's how you do it. You'd have your first, let's just go ahead and type it out like it would really look. Your first query would be this one that I just highlighted, and that would return your first 1,500 rows. You'd clone your query or just copy paste it into a new one or however you want to do it. And the second one, you'd include this offset 1501 so that it knows to pick up at record 1501. And you could keep doing that. You know, maybe you have 3,000 records, so you'd have 4 different queries and just keep doing the math and limit, you know, every time 1,500, but change the offset so it picks up at the next appropriate record. So hopefully I've not just totally confused you guys, but that's a really good solution for queries if you have that problem of needing more than 1,500 rows of data for Conga.
Okay, we have another question kind of dealing with complexity, and that is when you're working with the SOQL query, you're starting with the base object. How many levels up can you go from that base object and still be able to get data?
Yeah, great question. You can go 4 levels in a SOQL query. So, you know, child to parent, that's 2 relationships or 2 levels. So you can have 4 relationships basically, or 4 objects referenced in one query. I'm not going to show you all how to do that today just because it gets into relationship queries, which again are a topic better reserved for the advanced, the 201 class, whatever we want to call that. But know that it's possible, and if you have that need, again, that's a good one to call our support team with, and the customer success or new business analyst and myself can walk you through that.
Great. And why don't we let you continue, Shelley?
Okay, so I think our next query we were on, just got to keep my place. We were on 4. I've got a couple of other examples that I think you guys are going to like. So this next one is to show sort of the flexibility of what you can do with your filter criteria. So if you remember when we were going through the Conga Query Builder, I said on that filter selection page that the default is just and. Well, that doesn't mean that you can't, after you set up your query, you can go in, and I changed this to have annual revenue greater than 10 million, and the name has to be like B or the name has to be like E. So this is sort of this begins with B or begins with E because we're using, referring back to that wildcard that we showed in the other query. And then you can also see that just like you can do in a Salesforce report, I've used parentheses to specify what sort of the order of operations is kind of how I think about it. So it must have annual revenue of greater than 10 million. and at least one of these clauses. So let's just take a look at what this would look like in Force.com Explorer. So you can see both of these have their annual revenue greater than 10 million. And then one is a name that begins with the letter B, like this first option, and then the other one is Express Logistics. That would fall into this second one. So that's where your or can come into play. If you took out these parentheses, you're going to get an error because it's reading sort of 1, 2, 3. Annual revenue is greater than 10 million. 2, name like B, and 3, name like E. Well, it's saying you can't have a name that begins with B and begins with E. So that's where those parentheses come into play to sort of specify how you want that returned. So just like you can do in a Salesforce report, use your parentheses and your and or operators, or booleans I should say, to control how you want that returned. So that opens up a whole new door, so to speak, of how flexible you can get with those criteria. That's a good one to keep in mind. Okay, so the last example that we have, and then we're going to have plenty of time for more questions, is this aggregate query that we touched on at the beginning of the webinar. So let's go back to a sample account just so you all can see again what we're trying to do here. So just like I explained at the beginning, the need here, I'm sure a lot of you have run into this, where say you're on an account and you have multiple opportunities or some related record that has a number field, and you want to run some sort of calculation on that field. In my example, I want to get the sum of all 3 of these records. So you could certainly do that with regular Conga Composer in a report. Just get a report of all 3 of the opportunities, and then in your Excel template or Word, you can run a calculation to get that sum. But in order to do that, you have to show all 3 of these results, all 3 numbers, so that Word or Excel has those numbers in there in order to run the calculation. But a lot of times I hear from customers, I don't really want to show the math. I don't want to show all 3 records and then the total. I just want to see the grand total. We hear that all the time. So that is where an aggregated query comes in very, very handy. So what this looks like, there's all sorts of different aggregations you can do. A sum obviously is going to return the total of a numeric field. You can also do count, you can do average, so we'll look at some of those as well. But this particular one, again, we started with the base level object, opportunity, so that's our from, and then we selected amount because that's the field we want to total on, and then we're doing that same filter, this sort of standard Conga Composer filter of master object ID, in our case the account, that's what we're running off of, right, is an account. So that's where that comes into play. Let me jump back to the query. And then that PV0 with your single quotes on either side. So again, that's the sort of placeholder that Conga Composer is going to populate for you when you run it as part of your button. But for testing purposes, I'll have to manually update that. So let's just grab our select statement, and we'll put that into Explorer. And then if I run this with the PV0 in here, you'll see that I get this error message. It doesn't know what that means. So you guys can see this little caret, this little up arrow sort of symbol. That kind of shows you where you went wrong. So it's pointing to the from. Actually, that one's not as good. Usually it'll kind of point to where you went awry, but you can kind of, if you read these error messages, you can kind of figure out what's going on. It's saying invalid operator, and then if you go down here, invalid field PV0. It doesn't know what that is. So that's where you go, oh, okay. I need to delete the PV0 and the curly braces. Leave your single ticks in there, and then I just have a reminder for myself. Here's my account ID. That's just coming, from your Salesforce URL, but I just had it in here for ease of use. So if I just copy that and paste it again between my quotes, make sure there's not a space in there, and then run the query, you'll see that we get the grand total, again, of the amounts from all three of those opportunities. So it's coming through as EXPR0, and that stands for expression 0. It just indicates that you're doing an expression, running some sort of calculation. So it reminds me of pre-algebra where you'd talk about different expressions. But that's how the field name will come through in your Conga template builder, your view data as well. So a lot of times people will say, well, I don't really like that, seeing that in my template. I forget what it refers to or what it's doing. So in that case, you can easily provide what we call an alias. All you have to do is right after wherever you're doing your aggregation, you just type a space, so after that close parenthesis, and then you can give this whatever name you want. Maybe we call this total amount. And it has to be all one word. But you can see now that that column header changed to total amount instead of a EXPR0. So that's kind of handy for template purposes. I would recommend if you're doing an aggregation, go ahead and throw one of those in there. It just helps you keep straight what's what. Especially if you get to the point where you're running multiple aggregations in one query. Instead of just having EXPR0 and then EXPR1, you can have a better way to keep them organized. So another aggregation that you can do is, let's say instead of the total sum, we want to get the average of all of those. So that one's just AVG. Another little thing about the Force.com Explorer, again, you can see if I typed out average, maybe I forgot what the aggregation name was, it's showing up in blue. Again, that's just your hint on those sort of where or filter, I don't know what you call that, sort of the components of the query that you've done something wrong. So as soon as I put in AVG, it turns red. And then instead of total amount, let's call this average amount for our alias. And we'll query that, and you can see again the amount changed there. We're getting the average, and the column header changed as well. You can do count is another one that's really handy. A lot of times I just count on IDs. You're just counting the records basically. So you can change this every time you want. You can't use the word count. Did you notice how it was kind of messing that up? So don't use the same word as your aggregation. You've got to have it be unique. But then it's just counting that there are 3 opportunities. So all sorts of aggregations that you can do. These can get pretty complex. Like for example, if you wanted to, I mentioned that you can run multiple in one. And now I've got my count total. And then EXPR0 is my sum amount. So see how I mean? Like now we have 2 results in one query. It's sort of, maybe you forget which is which, although if you counted up 114,000 records from one parent record, that would be a lot. But maybe you just put in sum total here again as your alias. See what I mean? It kind of helps you keep straight what's what. So the aggregations get really, really powerful. That's, probably why we send people to queries and go to that solution the most. I'd say it's definitely the most popular with Conga Composer. So we're at a good little break point again. I'm going to pass it back to Ashley to see if we have any questions.
Okay, it looks like you hit the jackpot talking about aggregation because we have a number of questions.
Oh, good.
The first was around count. Can Conga handle queries where the count is more than 1,500 records?
No. So Conga Composer puts a limit of 200 results anytime you're doing an aggregation. So that's where, that's just unfortunately a hard and fast limit for right now. It's something that we'd like to increase in the future, and we're hoping to do so. So keep your eyes and ears peeled on upcoming releases, guys, and we hope to bump up that limit. But if you are doing any kind of aggregation, the row limit from a Conga standpoint is 200 records.
Do we know what the row limit is from a Force.com Explorer perspective?
I don't. That's one that I would have to look up.
Okay,
Sorry, my SOCL knowledge, you guys can see, relates highly to how we use it in Conga, but that's one that we can look up for you and try to find out.
okay. Another question is when you're doing an alias, can you use an underscore in the alias?
Well, I don't typically do that, but let's just throw one in and see what happens. Looks like you can.
Okay, great. Another question is, can you use those aggregates in the where part of the clause?
I don't know. I think you've got to
You
keep it.
can, but
You
it
can.
gets tricky there. You can't really use it with the where. That's where this is kind of some more advanced stuff where we have
Okay.
to say count, where we say select count ID from table, and that's where you have to use the having clause, having
Oh.
count ID greater than another.
Did everybody hear that okay?
I think so.
Okay, that's Brad, you guys. He's our buddy, our SOCL
Hello.
buddy over here. So you can tell he's got the SQL background and he knows what's what on these queries. So he's saying yes, but it's very advanced.
It's just a different syntax.
Yeah, different syntax or structure.
Okay. Another question was, so where do I get the Force.com Explorer? Could you show me that?
Oh, so I have this really advanced way of doing it. I'm just kidding. I just go to Google. It's the easiest way to find it, I think. This is what I did last night. I had to install it on a new laptop. So it's this wiki.developerforce is usually where I go to get it. And they don't make it super obvious as to where to install. You have to be sort of really looking for it. But there's this link here where it says click here to install at the end of this first paragraph. So it's an Adobe Air application. It'll just get installed on your local drive. It's not running in the cloud or anything, but you will connect to whatever instance you want to run out of. But it is cool. It can save your credentials from multiple different Salesforce instances. So if you have production and sandbox and maybe like a development environment that you just test in, you can save all of those and log into whichever instance you want and then run out of there. The other one that's really cool is called Developer Workbench, and we'll send out the link to that as well. The third one that I know of is right within Salesforce. If you're logged in as an administrator, system administrator profile, you can click on your name and go to Developer Console. Sorry, that opened on the other monitor. And then it has this query editor down at the bottom where you can throw your, just paste in a query and then click execute and it'll run it. So I'm getting an error on that one because I have the, the syntax is incorrect. But anyway, that's a good one if you're just right in Salesforce and you don't want to leave the environment. That's a fast and easy one to use, but not quite as powerful. So like I said, pros and cons to all of them, but we'll send you guys all the resources so you can choose what you like best.
Great. Thank you very much, Shelley. And we are just about out of time. So I know that there are other questions that have been asked. And as I mentioned before, any of the questions that we're not getting to in this session, we'll be sure to address in the Q&A that will be going out along with the recording of this session. I wanted to point out some resources that are available to everyone. And this webinar that we did is one instance of some of the things that we have. But we have a whole series of webinars. And if you go to our main support page, in the sidebar, you can see some of the resources that we have. And that includes the ability to sign up for other webinar sessions that we have. We also have an archive of the webinars that we've delivered. You can go there, get a copy of the recording, of the questions that were asked, and a copy of the agendas as well. We also have a series of tutorials that are known as quick starts, and the purpose of the quick starts are to help you adopt different Conga technologies successful, so do take a look at that. We also have a resource called the Starter Template Library, and these are example templates that you can use for your Conga solutions. So if you take a look at that, you can see samples of Word templates, PowerPoint templates, etc., and learn how to use some of that capability. You can use those as a basis for your own templates, or you can also use those simply as inspiration. We do have a YouTube channel that's at youtube.com/congamerge, and you can go there and see a number of videos that we think you might find useful. And then, of course, our online documentation, which you can access via the hyperlink or from the main support page as well. In addition to that, we also have a series of webinars. This is one of our bi-weekly webinars, but we also have a webinar geared around introducing people to the capabilities of Conga Composer. In addition to that, we have one that is specific to learning more about Conga Composer parameters. We have ones about different template types, such as Word and PowerPoint, and also different types of solutions, such as the e-signature solutions, or working with Conga Composer specifically to your needs if you're part of the nonprofit community. I want to thank everyone for attending, and as I mentioned, you'll be receiving a follow-up email, and that will include links to the agenda, the recording, and the FAQs for this session. In addition to that, you can also just go to that webinar archive, like I mentioned, via the hyperlink, or just search for the term archive. I wanted to point out that some of these resources that are available that we've mentioned are things that you can use to help you expand your Conga expertise, so do take advantage of them. And also, we'd appreciate any suggestions that you have on additional sessions that we could do or questions of clarification, because we're always interested in your feedback. Thank you very much for attending. We hope that this was useful, and everybody do have a great day.